video.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. My name is Brian Hyde. Twice a week, I get to sit down and share with you some of the more egregious examples of media manipulation, spinning the truth, and otherwise trying to keep you from getting a little too close to that truth, lest you see things as they really are. I can give you a couple good examples of this. We're going to be talking about political tall tales today. And who will start us out? CNN, you've got your hand up. Okay, here's a tweet they sent out here. Oh my gosh. Have you ever noticed the popularity of white robots? Yeah, now that you think of it, there seems like a lot of them are, they are white. The reason for these shades of technological white may be racism, according to new research. Now, I do love the response here. Oh, since robots are slaves, CNN thinks they should be black, not white. Okay. Leave it to CNN to start questioning. Well, there's a possibility that there's something racist at work here. These robots are coming out of the factory white. Maybe it was cheaper than painting them. Come on. Use your imagination, guys. Here's another great example. Maybe you've watched Ireland burn over the last 24 hours. Okay. This is from Sky News. Dublin stabbing. Far-right protests after girl, 5, among 3 children attacked in broad daylight near school. Now, a couple of things come to mind here. First of all, attacked by who? Dublin stabbing, kids being stabbed. Who was it who attacked them again? Was it just, the kids attacking? Oh, it was unassimilated migrants. Europe's had a little bit of trouble with that here recently, haven't they? How racist of these people to notice that as these out of control individuals are stabbing their children. But there's a great lesson from this, and here's the lesson that you can learn. Don't want your kids stabbed, mutilated, groomed? Welcome to the far right. That's all it took. You just have to believe in something better for your kids. Okay, now let's look at a different kind of political tall tale. This is my favorite kind because this is the kind that's limited only by imagination, specifically Jim Jones' imagination. Let's be thankful for Winder's stand against Senate incivility. So before I dive into this, I have to point out, there is still a very real battle going back and forth between Republican leadership in the legislature. And this is Jim Jones, former Attorney General, coming to the rescue of Chuck Winder, who's the President pro tem of the Senate, and has just been excoriating 3 senators specifically, but they're just upset that these senators have been calling out their colleagues. Now, when I say calling out, we're going to get into this in a moment, but we're not talking about attacking them unreasonably or otherwise spreading falsehoods. This is calling them out for supporting behaviors or supporting policies that are inconsistent with traditional conservative, do I dare say Republican principles. By the way, the Republicans don't have everything right. But in this case, this is what these senators are calling their colleagues out for. Let's see what Jim has to say about this and see if he can enlighten us. Jim's imagination begins as we start with a little bit of a rewind about what was going on with Senator Chuck Winder. Let me go back one slide. Senator Chuck Winder, the leader of Idaho Senate, is a good and patient man. Now, Jim says, I often disagree with him on issues coming before the Senate, but I don't question his ethics, temperament, and dedication to serving the public. Do you know why that is? That's because Jim and Chuck agree on expanding government as if government is the answer to all of our prayers. I mean, do they end their prayers in the name of Governor Little? I don't know. Winder has watched a decline in civility in the ranks of the Senate. He's watched senators with backbone who would stand up to him and say, this is not in line with the party platform. This is against the principles you say you represent. And he recently took action to bring up some of the instigators short. Well, he deserves the support of fellow senators and of the wider public, says Jim Jones. Legislative business suffers when there is continual internal sniping among the members. Okay, I got to ask this, and Jim, sorry you're not here to answer it, but what do you mean by legislative business? Because if that business is growing the government, if it's expanding its power and its costs so you can pass it on to me, I say they should be sniping at each other every second of every day. I would prefer gridlock. My wallet would prefer gridlock. My freedoms would prefer gridlock to people just getting along swimmingly and just passing law after law and growing government and throwing that financial burden on me and on my kids. Not so happy about that. Isn't that funny, though? That's how Jim portrays it. Well, the legislative business suffers. Well, if the legislative business is not in keeping with the state constitution, or if it's not in keeping with the minimal amount of government to accomplish what needs to be done to affect governance at the state level, then somebody's out of line. So in November 6 letters, Winder reprimanded Senators Scott Herndon of Sagal, Glenna Zeiderveld of Twin Falls for taking pot shots at other senators. Now, he says taking pot shots, but they were calling out some very specific practices, namely the cozy relationship between lobbyists and various special interest groups. IACI, we're looking in your direction, and also the senators who just pass a budget without ever stopping to question what's in it. Oh, you need more money? Sure. They're very good at giving away other people's money, not so good at being, responsible when it comes to managing it. He also called out Senator Brian Lenny for what Jim calls attacking and degrading other senators and the public. Oh, he degraded the public. Did you hear that? Gee, please, if you haven't checked out Senator Brian Lenny's X, formerly Twitter, page, you may not agree with him. That's fine. But what you'll find there is a guy who cannot be bullied. He's not bullying other people. He will engage them, and he does have a pretty sharp sense of humor and a pretty sharp wit. So I guess if you're not cut out to have thick enough skin to be criticized and or, to take criticism, probably you shouldn't be in politics. Okay? Lenny is not out there, degrading senators and degrading the public. He's calling people out for misbehavior, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So because of this, Zeiderveld and Lenny were stripped of committee leadership positions. This was Chuck Winder's way of putting them in place. Now, Jim says it's not a surprise that these three conducted themselves in a disgraceful manner. After all, they're not for growing the state, right? They won primary races against what Jim calls reputable incumbents in 2022 with ugly, truth-deprived campaigns. Maybe give us an example of that. Did they actually hold up the voting record of these people? Because if that's how they beat them, there's a possibility here that Jim is not allowing. Now listen to how he breaks it down. This is Herndon won by running a smear campaign against incumbent Jim Woodward, a Navy veteran and highly regarded legislator. Now, since Jim's a veteran too, he's going to play that veteran card early and often. Lenny won by smearing incumbent Jeff Agenbrod, a reasonable, effective senator. Reasonable. That's one of Jim's favorite words. Zeiderveld's campaign against Jim Patrick, an accomplished legislator, meaning somebody who didn't make waves and call us out when we're being naughty, was not much better. But he's not going to tell us about that. These are the pregnant hints that are being dropped. Please, just join me in outrage. Jim, you should be hosting a talk show, a radio talk show. Seriously. You're very good at telling people this is what should outrage you. Now, he says the Idaho Freedom Foundation and its affiliates joined in trashing the incumbents. How did they do that? Did they show their voting records? Because that's normally what they do. They want to show you who's not living up to the lofty talk that they give when they're running for re-election. Okay, they're just showing the voting record. That's it. They're dealing with reality. Oh, but he does that employing generous amounts of out-of-state money. Proof? Oh, you don't have that? Okay, well, I hope whenever you pulled that statement, out of whatever, I hope you stood up first. That's all. Nevertheless, moving on, Jim's commentary says the IFF, the Idaho Freedom Foundation, really scored with the election of these three to the Senate. They all get a 100% rating on IFF's education index. Now, this is the education index. Is this the legislative index? Because this is just one area of a much broader index, by doing IFF's bidding on every education measure coming before the Senate. Okay, so it's just one area, but the problem here is these are senators who are actually sticking to principle, even when it's unpopular. Now, does that put them in league with IFF? In some ways, yes. Does that mean that IFF is controlling them like little marionettes out there in the legislature? Not at all. But see, that's what we're supposed to believe, or this is Jim's tall tale. So to get a 100% rating, you must oppose almost every education funding bill while supporting measures that would require taxpayers to pay for private and religious schooling by allowing money to follow the students rather than just pounding it into a system that is failing. Sorry, Jim, but it needed some context there. You must oppose almost every education funding bill. Well, what if those education funding bills are wasteful? What if they're not necessary? This is one of the reasons why we elect individuals who will toe the line when everybody else is feeling very generous, again, with other people's money. Now, the 3 senators even voted against legislation funding their own community colleges. Oh my gosh. Could it be that the legislation in question was something that was not necessary or that could be addressed in other ways? Because if that's the explanation, then there's something much more logical at work here. North Idaho College, College of Western Idaho, College of Southern Idaho. Oh, loyalty to the Idaho Freedom Foundation takes priority over support for their communities, meaning shut up and vote for every budget that comes before you. That's how you become a reasonable, accomplished legislator in the eyes of Mr. Jones. Please. Now, this is one of the places where Jim really gets indignant, and he whips out the veteran card here, but he also plays a very interesting canard here. IFF has come out strong against the open primaries initiative. So the threesome, these senators must also oppose it. Now, again, they're not being told by IFF, you have to oppose this. Smart people who see the open primaries initiative for what it is are going to speak out against it. Some of that will include legislators. Zeiderfeld kind of misfired on the issue, according to Jim, claiming on social media that the initiative sponsor, Reclaim Idaho, is a communist PAC. Okay, now I don't think she insisted that they were like legitimately communist, but she did say they are promoting communist ideals. And when you see the people who have donated to them, let's just say her concerns are borne out. Her tweet had a screenshot of contributors to Reclaim Idaho, including Rich Stivers, a well-regarded Twin Falls Republican whose father served as House GOP Speaker back in the 80s. So how dare she, criticize someone who had a father who was also a legislator? But this is the part that really gets under Jim's skin. She implied that Rich, a Vietnam veteran like Jim, who put his life at risk fighting the communists, was a commie supporter? Ignorance must be blissful, thunders Mr. Jones. Really? He put his life at risk fighting the communists. Well, Jim, I don't know the last time you read the planks of the Communist Manifesto, but have you ever compared them to what exactly is happening in America today? And this is with Republican as well as Democratic help. We have implemented just about every plank of the communist platform. Every single one of them. So when you see Republicans in office supporting communist ideas like, a very steeply graduated income tax, taking away the property of dissidents, government school for everybody. It's in there. It is. I believe they even have a kind of banking system that's very similar to what we're talking about here. But the bottom line is, it's a perfectly legit criticism if, in fact, there are policies being supported that would expand collectivism, socialism, communism. Trying to pin her down just to one word. She was saying he's a communist. He fought communists. Well, did he fight them long enough that he went native? Jim, did you fight them long enough that you went native? Because a person has to wonder when they see what you support. Well, I must come to Rich's defense. I served in Vietnam and had access to communist propaganda. Yeah. Now you have access to your own propaganda organs in the corporate media. I can attest that the commies never supported open primary elections. Wow, who was asserting that they did? In fact, the only elections they supported were the ones where party bosses or special interests controlled who got placed on the ballot. If officials departed from the party line, they were severely disciplined. Oh, well, that sounds just like the Republican Party. And they were putting people in camps too. Oh, no, they weren't. But okay, anyway. Zeiderfeld has drawn an opponent in the 2024 GOP primary who might be able to explain to her the horrors of communism, because I'm sure Glenita hasn't figured that out for herself, Jim. She's never cracked a history book. She's never seen any documentary that would indicate just how many bodies communists have stacked up. I mean, it takes a lot to make the Nazis look like they were slackers, but I think the commies may have this one. Between Stalin and Mao, yeah, they made Hitler look like a piker. Anyway, Alex Caval knows firsthand. Her family escaped communist Romania and immigrated to the U.S. in 1988. She's done well in Twin Falls, and Jim says she'll be a marvelous replacement for Zeiderfeld. The other two in the threesome will have a rematch with their 2022 opponents, and they may also be replaced. Woodward and Eggenbrod both say they will be prepared to defend against the smears this year. How will they do that, by the way? Oh, they have a compliant press and smear machine of their own. Oh, that's wonderful. Chuck Winder may be easy to rest by this time next year. Yeah, unless, of course, Donald Trump gets elected. Then you're gonna have a pretty dark Thanksgiving if that's the case. Nevertheless, so there's the chastisement that's going on, and It's such an interesting conundrum that we find ourselves in here in the state of Idaho. On the one hand, with the open primaries, the Republican Party, which is a private organization, okay, this is not a state organization, is being unfavorably compared to, the commies, where everything was inside the state, nothing was outside the state. In fact, Trent Clark, who is apparently a GOP leader from Soda Springs, talks about two chastisements. I'm going to touch on this one just very quickly, but he uses a quote from author Hyde. A just chastisement may benefit a man, though it seldom does, but an unjust one changes his blood to gall. And he says Idaho's testing this centuries-old maximum as political leaders on two sides of the state levy discipline. In Boise, Senate President Pro Tem Chuck Winder has chastised 3 senators, removing 2 from committee leadership. In Idaho Falls, GOP District 32 Chair Doyle Beck has charged legislators with platform violation, threatening to strip their identity as Republicans, basically saying, we're a private organization. If you can't conduct yourself according to the standards of this organization, maybe you shouldn't be a part of it. Now, Winder's calling out the practice of what they say is maligning the motives of colleagues with whom the accused sit in committees. What if they're calling out their actual voting record? Is that maligning the motives, or is that legit? Senator Scott Herndon of Sagal, Glenita Zeiderveld of Twin Falls, and Brian Lenny of Nampa are allowed to raise intellectual arguments and reasoning to support their positions, but Senate rules do not allow assailing the motives of colleagues with whom you disagree. Now, those Senate rules, do they apply generally in every area of their life, or do they apply on the Senate floor when these individuals are speaking? It'd be nice to have a little clarification on that, because it sounds like Trent's trying to make this, very broad. Attack policy, not people, is an ancient rule of deliberative bodies dating back to the 3rd century AD and the writings of St. Augustine of Hippo. This rule is clear and unambiguous in Mason's Handbook, the rulebook governing procedure in the Idaho State Senate. Okay, but they still have freedom of speech, and they can still speak the truth, even if that truth makes some of their colleagues look a little more collectivist than they would, thanks to the adoring media. Beck butchered the previously existing Republican platform, stripping all mention of stopping the flow of illegal drugs. Okay, quick. Did prohibition work for alcohol? For all the war on drugs? Did that work? Did any of that work? You know what the answer is. It's no, it didn't. So it's not that, they're just trying to get more drugs across our border. No, maybe they're just tired of beating the same dead horse, and it's time to look at something new. It's a possibility. And forcing sincere new conservative converts, sincere, like the ones that have been bragging all week on Twitter about how, oh, look at me, I just became a Republican, wink, wink, in Idaho, so I can vote in the primary. Yeah, it's going on, and it's very open. This is not being concealed in any way. These are people who are proud of it. But Beck wanted the new converts to the party to wait 12 months, or to the leadership rather, to wait 12 months before exercising voting rights. I think that's actually not a bad idea. And he did this under the authority of a few hundred of his carefully hand-picked delegates. Okay, yeah, it's just he's the mastermind of it all. The crazy thing about this is Trent is conflating two very different things. Okay, the Senate, the Idaho State Senate, is actually part of state government. It is not a private entity. The Republican Party, the GOP, that is a private entity. So they have very different standards as to how they ought to be conducting themselves or conducting, their business. One of them is very much funded by taxpayers, operated in the interest of the people. The other one is a private organization. Winder's judgment fulfills an obligation to preside over a thoughtful, deliberative, and orderly chamber of lawmakers. I think he meant to say yes men. Violating rules of civility destroys the entire body's ability to function. Because they don't have the cover. They don't have the shadows to work within. And that's dangerous. People might catch on to what they're doing. Let's go on. Winder's actions were a matter of public record and were not imposed in secret. That's great, because he was working for a state agency. Beck's tribunal should, by right, be open to every Republican the committee supposedly represents. It is a private organization. So I do think we need to make that distinction. A secret meeting with vague charges in front of an exclusive small panel empowered to threaten a legislator's re-election? Yeah, it's a private organization. If it were a state organization, this would be an entirely different matter. If that's not fertile ground for corruption, nothing is. Okay. Moving on. It's rumored that Beck's real gripe is legislators who supported Idaho's launch job training program. Yes, the one that just happened to benefit a lot of the governor's closest friends in construction and building trades and IACI and, these special interests that just are so closely tied to government. And yeah, that's the crazy thing here. It's not something the state needs to be doing in the first place. Now, the spin here that this writer is using is saying, well, this is just to get able-bodied workers off the couch and into productive jobs. Sure it is. It's aimed at high school students. How do I know? Because I have a high school senior, and trust me, he's getting bombed with a lot of direct mail for this launch program. I don't know how much they're spending on it, but it's a lot, and it comes quite often. Launch does, the GOP, the Idaho GOP platform doesn't mention launch, but it does say support education and professional technical education to develop a well-trained workforce. That doesn't mean that that's what the state is supposed to be engaged in, picking winners and losers. But that's Trent's interpretation. So it's just likely Beck's platform interpretation that may be violated. Anyway, bottom line is you have a very big difference in the leadership style here. One of them is for smaller government. One of them is for more freedom, more responsibility, more fiscal responsibility. The other one is not. Wender's chastisement asks senators to treat colleagues with respect even when disagreeing. Beck uses chastisement to force agreement, disrespecting the choice of the voters he supposedly represents within his private organization rather than a state agency. So you decide if one of these chastisements falls short of being just. Look, all I know for certain is that one of these is trying very hard to pretend that we're just here to do the work of the people. And that's why these open primaries are going to make it so much easier when everybody's vote is in there and everybody can do their thing. By the way, I wanted to show you this. Matt Edwards had posted this. A vote for ranked choice voting is a vote for abortion on demand, gender mutilation, raising taxes, driver's license for illegal aliens, homeless encampments, failing schools, public funding of drag shows, weakening integrity of elections, suppression of free speech, increased federal powers, Second Amendment infringement. By the way, watch for red flag laws. That's one of the big reasons that the people pushing ranked choice voting are trying to get it through. Never-ending spending and woke indoctrination. That's what you get with ranked choice voting. Oh, by the way, there is an interesting counter to ranked choice voting. Should this be something we find ourselves saddled with? If you only vote for one candidate, what then? Do you force the system to throw out your vote, to admit that it can't handle you actually voting for the person you want to vote for, instead of having to strategize like some kind of chess game and, 3 or 4 moves ahead, I voted for these two because I knew that they'd probably get eliminated and then it would go to this one over here. It's a mess. It's complicated more than it needs to be. And frankly, this is not a time to be complicating and otherwise casting doubts on what happens with, our elections. I know that there aren't very many people who will say it, but the truth remains. There's a lot of reasons to wonder about election fraud in the 2020 election and the election since then. Nothing has been done to really adjudicate this. All that's happened is news media and various politicians have, oh, no, there's nothing wrong. Everything is cool. Everything's fine because it benefits them. Funny how that worked out. All right. A couple quick things. I want to recommend an article to you. In fact, if you want to really see a better, really detailed look at some of the infighting that's going on, I strongly recommend this article by Brian Allman. This was published in the Kootenai Journal a couple days ago. Is Idaho's Republican governor funding attack ads on Republican Idaho senators? In particular, these 3 senators who seem to be the problem children for Chuck Winder. Something Brian says here that just really jumped out at me. At the very least, he says, the funding surrounding the hit political literature raises questions about Governor Little's priorities. And by the way, he shows this is not just, just in case, I'm just making this up as I go on. He shows you how the money flows. Governor Little apparently solicited donations on the premise of fighting Joe Biden, only to give a large amount of money to a political action committee that hired an out-of-state firm to distribute attack ads against 3 conservative senators. Why would Governor Little want those senators out? Why? He doesn't have to attack him personally. Chuck Winder doesn't have to attack him personally. They've got a press corps that will go out there and do it for them. So I guess we're upholding those standards and that decorum and, that thoughtful, deliberative nature that they're so proud of. Look, the bottom line is there are people who are willing to stand up for your freedom and everybody else's freedom? Do you recognize it when that's happening? Or are you allowed to be led with a little ring through the nose, a little fear ring? Oh, they're scary, and they were mean, and they said things that were just so true but mean about these other legislators. And look, freedom once it's gone is a very difficult thing to get back. Maybe you've noticed that by now. But when you have someone who's actually on your side, standing up for you and trying to slow the roll of Leviathan, you might want to consider maybe helping that person out as opposed to helping the people who are trying so hard to silence them because it's uncovering some of the stuff that they would prefer be kept in the dark. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.